Welcome to the Stewardship Podcast, where your host, financial advisor Andrew Mitchell, talks with industry experts to help you steward your time, talents, and money.
Welcome to the Stewardship Podcast. This week, we're talking about nutrition. I've always heard it said, you are what you eat, and today we're really going to find that out. We have Amanda Scaletta with us. Welcome to the show, Amanda.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation. She's a registered dietitian, also nutritionist. Sounds like we're going to get a little bit of a definition of the delineation between those two. But Amanda, why don't you start us off by giving us a little bit of your background and a little bit of why did you become a registered dietitian?
Yeah, thanks. So I grew up in a house where probably it's the house of a dietitian's dream. My mom was a very careful and considerate cook. She was thoughtful about what she prepared, why she prepared it. She made sure it was delicious as well as nutritious. There was a great assortment of treats and splurges, but definitely an emphasis on eating well. And so to me, growing up, I thought that was very normal. So my growing up experience was normative around healthy eating. And then when I was in high school, I took a nutrition class, which was really interesting to me on the science side. I was really intrigued by the science of metabolism and the interaction of micronutrients. And I thought this is a great field to go into, not only because it kind of plays to my interests, which included eating well, but it also is really practical because even if you're not using it in an employment setting, everyone eats every day, and that's not something that's going away. As you know, modernity moves on, we're not going to stop eating. It's fuel for our body. It is a really complicated science, but it's really practical in the sense of everyone eats every day. And so I pursued nutrition at Michigan State, food science and human nutrition bachelor's. And then I moved to Baltimore, where I did an internship at Johns Hopkins in clinical nutrition, which is where a lot of dietitians are employed, but certainly not exclusively. The dietitians work in food science industry. They work in schools and other places that would have food service and research, and also community counseling and those types of things. And nutritionist isn't always used ubiquitously across the board. It doesn't require any special education, whereas registered dietitian is a national registration that you've certified that you've done the school, you've taken an exam. And so that's the, if you're looking for sound nutrition advice, check for that RD credential. Nutritionist certainly is a good word to use as we're talking, but it doesn't necessarily mean any particular line of training.
For sure. Great. Appreciate that background and a little bit of the explanation between the difference between that registered dietitian and nutritionist. So why don't you get us started in diving into our conversation in what is the job of a nutritionist or a registered dietitian?
Yeah, so I would try to kind of boil it down. Like I was saying, they work in many different aspects of industry, so it isn't all the same. But what I do think the nutritionist's role is, or a registered dietitian, would be to synthesize that food science and nutrition science information into something that is approachable to the general population. And I would say that's something that research and food science has not done terribly well through kind of the recent decades, where there's so much emphasis on a specific nutrient or a specific, as research is pulling out, we want to study omega-3 fatty acids, or we want to study the role of magnesium in this. People don't eat those nutrients, or if they think that's essential, then they reach out to a supplement to try to fill that need. And really that isn't the basis of healthy eating. Like, we want to be eating foods that are nourishing to our bodies, that contain all of these nutrients in vivo, in life. You know, we don't want to take science and eat science. We want to be enjoying and savoring our food. So I think the dietitian's role is to help people, the general population, understand what healthy eating is, which means synthesizing a lot of science information, which may be interesting to someone in the general population, but it isn't what's at the grocery store available to buy. And then on top of that, certainly if there's any unique medical condition or diagnosis, a dietitian will work on creating a therapeutic diet that would be unique to that person's needs. So we probably won't be diving into therapeutic diets today, but if anyone has a need for that, certainly reaching out to a registered dietitian to help put together what would be a real individualized diet for them.
Perfect. So I want to spend the bulk of our conversation talking about nutrition and what we eat as far as times of stress or crisis. I mean, we all know, I mean, if you don't know what's going on in the world right now, you live under a rock. But we have this crisis thing going on. People are dealing with it differently. People are experiencing it differently. I've had one individual that I know that lost 30 pounds. I have another individual that I know that said he can't stop growing, and that's not taller. Talk to us a little bit about what's going on as we're going through stress and crisis and what we should be aware of.
Yeah, I think this is a really timely question because certainly what's happening in our global pandemic is adding a lot of anxiety and stress to people. But I think as we kind of consider the Western diet and the Western way of life, there's a lot of anxiety already in what we would say would be a non-COVID-19 environment. And this is just unearthing, I think, even more some of the ways that we as Americans maybe don't have a very healthy relationship with food because of external pressures as well as internal pressures. So I think it's especially relevant right now, but I think it's always been true in at least recent past. So kind of as you mentioned, there's generally two different ways that people respond to anxiety. One is to kind of comfort eat and to seek the immediate pleasurable response of having either something crunchy or salty or sweet, or even just out of boredom, or I'm not sure what to do, so I can go do this action of eating. So there's kind of this overeating, comfort eating arm that happens when people feel anxious or stressed. And then there's also the side of I'm so anxious, I'm just going to be immersed in everything else. I'm kind of forgetting to eat, and I'm not prioritizing eating well. And maybe I have suppressed hunger because I have this kind of fight or flight adrenaline rush. And so I'm not feeling hungry and I'm not able to really devote my attention to eating well. So you kind of have these two opposite tracks that people tend to lean towards when anxiety or stress comes into their life. And both of them can be dealt with in a healthy way, and both can be ignored and lead to some really kind of traumatic health outcomes. So
sure.
I can talk in either direction, but I guess kind of briefly to start with, maybe the more common response is probably overeating out of comfort and boredom. And I would say that the additional element that's true in this environment is most people are now working from home, or many are, which means you have kind of unfettered access to what's in your pantry and your fridge, which when you've been in an office maybe has been more limited. And there might be benefits to working from home, meaning you are the one who's responsible for the purchasing and cooking and preparing. So you're not maybe relying as much on pre-prepared or restaurant food, but it's easy access certainly is a challenge when we're thinking about feeling anxious or stressed. So one of the first things for really both either the anxious eater who's eating too much and the anxious eater who's not eating is to be mindful about your choices and why. So there isn't anything wrong with eating something for comfort. In fact, that's a very human coping mechanism that has effects. We don't want to be a habit. We don't want to be in the habit of eating out of comfort. So if, something unusually stressful happens, to say like, I'm going to have an extra snack because that would feel good right now. Certainly that's fine. If your habit is every day, I'm finding I'm going to the pantry, I'm getting out a snack, I'm bringing it to my workspace, I'm eating while I'm working, all of that is very distracted. It isn't an intentional choice to eat. And that's where you start seeing kind of the dangerous outcomes of unfettered eating. On the other side, maybe you've been ignoring eating, and being mindful of that to say, you know what, I really do need to carve out time to eat. Even if I'm not hungry, I realize that this is a fuel that my body needs. So unintentional weight loss is not healthy. It isn't a sign of good health. Yeah. And so really starting with a place of mindfulness about why you're making the choices you're making, and making sure that they're aligned with what are your overall goals. So there shouldn't be guilt around how you're eating, but there should be kind of movement towards what is more healthy. And people on any end of that spectrum can make choices that move towards health by just even having that first step of mindfulness. So I would say that's at least a jumping off point, no matter what the struggle is under stress, would be to really take a look at what your habits are starting to be and be mindful about where to go.
Yeah, that's great. You've mentioned healthy eating a couple times. Can you talk us through, I mean, I think we all, I listened to a podcast from a radio station out of Tennessee, and the host of the show talks about spaghetti being a great meal and it's so healthy, and everyone's going, no, it's got so much carbs. Like, yes, it's got tomato sauce, but that doesn't make it healthy. Can you talk us through what it means to eat healthy?
Yeah, I actually really appreciate that question, because I did want to clarify the word healthy, at least when I'm using it, isn't exclusively meaning nutritious. Because even there are people who eat extremely nutritiously but don't have a healthy lifestyle. Like, so they're actually overemphasizing the nutrients of food at the expense of behaviors and habits that would be considered healthy. So there is kind of this tension between nutritious, healthy, and unhealthy. So I will definitely walk through what are the basics of healthy eating. But I want to also make sure that everyone realizes there's a lot of wiggle room, and you can find research that would say, oh, following this one specific diet, very healthy, this other, oh, very bad. But what we want to do is always be comparing it to the general tenets of healthy eating, which this is how I'm going to distill healthy eating to you. Okay. No matter what the diet, I don't really like to use the word diet. Diet meaning the lifestyle of eating, not necessarily a prescriptive diet. Across the board, research always supports that diets that are full of a variety of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans and seeds, dairy, and meats are healthy. So you'll notice those aren't like chips and smoothies. And so I'm not being specific about what those foods are, but you cannot go wrong if you are focusing on eating a wide variety of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds and beans, dairy, and meat. Now, people like to eat food that tastes good. So those things can be prepared in any combination. But as you're considering snack foods, for instance, certainly eating, carrots and hummus, a scoop of yogurt with granola, mixing food groups is a really wise way to eat, because that's what makes us feel full longer. So you want to make sure that there's a good amount of kind of those macronutrients. You want to have fat, protein, carbohydrates. Fiber for sure is a big thing that has been neglected in the American diet, I think, but you get it by eating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and beans. So if you're putting those things at the center of whatever your meal is, it really doesn't matter too much what proportion those things are in. It doesn't matter if one meal doesn't have those things and the next does. It isn't about being regimented. It's about having a healthy balance that really exposes your palate and your body to this wide variety of flavors, nutrients, and foods. So the spaghetti example is a good one. Spaghetti is a really nourishing meal. It's a pretty quick meal to make. Now, if your proportion is a giant plate of noodles with a little quarter cup of pasta sauce, you're not really nourishing your body. You are going for the simple carbs. But if you have a healthy proportion of tomato sauce on there, you're keeping your pasta portion to a smaller serving, and you're definitely adding in some kind of leafy green vegetable or cruciferous vegetable like broccoli to round out that plate, you have an easy, quick meal that is really nourishing, and you don't need to be anxious about, oh, well, what was the proportion of, oh, that was really too many carbs, or this was, as long as you're making sure that those primary food groups are represented on your plate, you're probably in good shape.
Great. That's a great, helpful thing to talk through quickly, just because I feel like there's so many different ideas of what it means to eat healthy. So I appreciate that. Can you talk us through, in a given day, what it looks like to eat healthy as far as like the rhythms that we have throughout a day?
Sure. Yeah, I think there, again, you can find a lot of differing viewpoints from individuals who find different things that work for them. And I think that's normal. No body is made exactly the same. But what I think becomes dangerous is when someone starts to say, this is how you have to eat. Because what we want to circle back to is really understanding our own body's hunger and fullness cues, our motivations for eating, and how are we learning to grow more balanced in our approach to eating. But I would say for the general population, when you wake up within 2-ish hours, to have something to eat that would be nourishing, because what you're doing is breaking the fast that you've had overnight. And there is something very healthy about giving your body a chance to not eat. So there is wisdom in fasting, and we regularly rhythm that to overnight. Some people like to push that a little longer. They like to do kind of an intermittent fast schedule where you stop eating at a certain time, you start eating at another. For me personally, that's a little too rigid. I think as long as you're giving yourself this kind of longer resting period of not eating, I don't think you have to wait till noon. Now it's noon and I can start eating. I think as long as you're thinking, I'm up, I'm going to start my day, I want to give myself, my metabolism, this chance to really step into higher gear now that I'm ready to start my day. So my recommendation is usually within 2 hours of waking that you have something kind of balanced to eat. And then spreading your meals out throughout the day. Some people really benefit from a small snack in between meals. So breakfast, small snack, lunch, small snack, dinner. Other people really don't need the extra break. So the wisdom behind that would be keeping your blood sugar from having these high spikes, lows and highs. But many people can still do that on a breakfast, lunch, and dinner schedule, as long as you really are making sure that what you're eating is nutritious. So if my breakfast was a croissant and a sugar coffee, that probably isn't going to get me to lunch in terms of nourishment. Like I've pretty much only given myself simple, easy to digest fuel that isn't going to hold over. So what I want to make sure is that there is something with more staying power, something with some fiber, some of those micronutrients that would be in a oatmeal or even a whole grain muffin or an omelet, things that would help me make it to lunch in that sense. But again, when you start feeling those cues of, I'm hungry, to look for what would be a balanced way to meet my hunger needs. So not just going for, your brain is going to drive you to take the easiest road, which is going to be these hyper palatable foods that are really sweet, really high in fat, really high in salt. They have immediate gratification. But what over time, someone who's been eating intentionally well will have a desire to eat the foods that are nourishing for us. Like you have to override some of the food processing that overrides your brain's chemical response to eat well. And so for me, that means I don't buy a lot of the products that I would immediately run to when I'm feeling that, just like, maybe I'm looking for a quick snack. Maybe I'm still a little hungry from breakfast. I'm going to run into the kitchen. I'm going to grab like a handful of chocolate chips. Like that is not a nourishing snack. It might taste good and there isn't anything wrong with having it. But if my habit is, instead of going in and saying like, look, I have blueberries washed in the fridge and a little cup of plain yogurt, that's a much more nourishing snack and it's delicious. But if I haven't prepared ahead of time, I'm going to resort to the quick and easy option, which might be less nourishing. And I would say then it is wise to cut off eating in the evening. After you've had dinner, if you think you need an evening snack, by all means, but then do have kind of like an intentional time of, now I'm ending my day of eating, so I can kind of start that recovery process of resting before the next day start.
Is there, I'm always one for a, 10 p.m. cup of ice cream or popcorn. Do you have a recommendation of what that end time should be?
Sure. I do think a good example, you mentioned popcorn. My husband is a snacker. He just loves the act of eating. He just thinks that like crunch is so wonderful. So he is in the habit of making plain popcorn with an air popper probably 4 nights a week because he's looking for a snack. It isn't because he didn't eat well during the day. He just wants to do that act of eating. And to me, popcorn's almost a freebie because it's this high fiber whole grain. And unless you're dousing it with fat and sugar or fat and salt, it really is just a bulky, crunchy snack. So I think certainly according to your own preferences, if it is a piece of fruit or yogurt's a good one for me. It's got a good blend of nutrients and is pretty delicious. So I think if you can find something that fits, like this is a healthy-ish snack and I'm not going to overdo the portion, definitely finding a way to kind of meet what you're craving without totally throwing away what is considered nutritious in this instance.
Yeah, no, that's great. You mentioned intermittent fasting. It seems like intermittent fasting and the keto diet are like big things that they almost are like hand in glove right now. Mm-hmm. Talk to us a little bit about why someone might do some intermittent fasting or the benefits or the do's and don'ts that have to go along with those two things.
Sure. So intermittent fasting, like I said, is kind of just a variation on what has been a normal human eating pattern for centuries. And I would say research seems to suggest that if you are someone who is a high performance athlete, or someone who is a professional athlete, or has some underlying reason to keep your body fat percent extremely low, below what would be considered healthy for a normal population, intermittent fasting is a successful way of doing that, because what it does is it requires your body to run more hours off of stored energy than it does on consumed food. So certainly there are some subsets of the population that really do find that to be a useful tool. For the general population, I feel like you're missing the forest for the trees, because what happens is if you're shrinking your eating window, you have to be ever more intentional about making sure you're getting the right nutrients packed into that smaller eating window. And already the Western diet is the last dietary recommendations research shows the only thing Americans get as much or more than recommended in is salt, fat, and added sugars. So when it comes to micronutrients, carbohydrates from whole grain sources, protein, healthy fats, Americans by and large consume less than the recommended amount. So shrinking your eating window means you have to be much more intentional about making sure that the only things you're eating are the things that pack the best nutritional punch, because you're not having kind of the grace of an extra meal or 2 extra meals. So by and large, I don't recommend the average person pursues intermittent fasting with any kind of intensity, unless it really is a requirement for your career, your job, your sport, those types of things. And the ketogenic diet, again, it's a therapeutic diet that was developed for people who have seizures. It is changing the way your body uses fuel so that your brain does not use glucose. It switches to using ketos. And for the general population, I highly discourage people from following a ketogenic diet. It is not balanced. It's very hard to sustain. If you have a problem with seizures that requires you to follow it, I hope you have good support, because it is really tricky, and it requires a lot of intentionality to make sure you're not nutrient deficient in other areas. So generally, fad diets, I feel like they tend to fall outside what would be a balanced diet, though they often have little nuggets that are helpful, because certainly paleo was a big one for a long time. It's being eclipsed, I think, by keto and some other things, but certainly its emphasis on eating these fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, and stepping away from highly processed, these hyper-palatable foods, that's really good. That is great. But when it starts saying, well, you can't have beans and you can't have dairy and those things restrict people from being able to participate in family outings or a summer barbecue or a birthday party, and start to restrict even your social ability to eat well. And take kind of the focus off of, this is nourishing, enjoying food, and this is a rigid diet that I'm following. So I generally recommend, if something appeals to someone about a fad diet, kind of take the parts that fit into this balanced, kind of historically wise diet and add them in. And certainly if you want to eat paleo 1 meal a day, sure, do it. But don't put these rigid restrictions in place that keep you from savoring, enjoying, and interacting with food in a more balanced way.
Sure. No, that's great. So we talked a little bit earlier about this whole idea of stress and crisis, and how, our nutrition changes during those times. Can you talk us through a little bit of I just got that feeling of oh, I need to eat this, or I need a snack. And how do you overcome running to that bad thing and really going for the thing that's going to bring you nutrition and support you like you need it?
Yeah, that's great. So neither of my first 2 comments are directly related to nutrition, but they're so intertwined that I don't want to neglect saying them. Sleep is super important. It's one of the things that helps us regulate kind of our brain chemistry. It gives us a chance to do the work of repair that our body needs. And in general, Americans already don't get enough sleep. And then you add anxiety and stress to that, and it starts to encroach even more onto the amount of sleep we're getting. So if you don't have healthy sleep habits, no matter how nutritious your diet is, you're going to still be having some of these negative impulse control, certainly some other medical complications. And so prioritizing good sleep is a a really important jumping off point for having a healthy diet. And then the other thing would be physical activity. So making sure that there is some kind of way that you're getting your heartbeat up, you're getting a little bit of movement into your day. Both of those things, sleep and movement, are essential to building a nutritious diet because they're so closely intertwined with the way our machine of a body is fine-tuned. So to start there, I think is really important, not to neglect either of those things. And then once you have really done what you can to improve your sleep and make sure you're prioritizing some kind of enjoyable movement. I don't mean like punishing exercise. I just mean something that is, gets your heart rate up and you enjoy doing. Then certainly looking at how are you going to build habits around your eating that support your overall goal. So I mentioned just like for me, not purchasing some of the snacks that I'm more likely to run to when I'm not having as good of impulse control is one step. So I think intentional meal planning and purchasing, and the COVID pandemic certainly added an extra element to that. I would say, like in my own family, I was not shopping as frequently because of limited access to grocery stores. Some of the grocery stores had cleared out shelves for some portion of the early weeks of the pandemic. And so those things add complexity to our grocery shopping and our meal planning. But whenever we can, to plan ahead for what do we intend our meals to be, so that we do grocery shop accordingly, so that you're able to provide the healthy meals that you're wanting and the healthy snacks that you're wanting. So that's definitely one thing. And I think under stress or anxiety, simplifying your meal plan is very wise, so that maybe you are eating something more frequently than you would have without this added layer of stress on your schedule and your time, but finding a few things that work and implementing them. And so anytime someone is wanting to make big changes in their health or their diet, my recommendation is pick something small and measurable and do that one thing until it's a natural habit. So you don't have to start with, okay, well, I'm in a meal plan, so I'm making 7 dinners, 7 lunches. Now I'm going to the grocery store and I'm doing those things. So what you need to do is maybe 2 meals this week, I want to make sure I'm putting more vegetables on my plate. So one of them, I'm going to do an entree salad, and maybe I'm finding a new recipe that looks good. And maybe I'm still saying, what's the easiest way? I'm going to buy a bagged salad that has already pre-chopped vegetables and those kind of things. But I'm just trying to make measurable steps towards adding vegetables to my plate 2 meals a week this week. And so then you can do your normal and just add in the healthy behavior until that feels normal, and then add a new behavior in, so that it isn't an overhaul, because generally people just fall off the wagon. If you're trying to overhaul everything at once, it's very hard to be consistent. So consistent small change is by far the best way to make progress towards health, no matter where you're starting from.
Great. There's he's a blogger and an author that I really like. His name's James Clear. And it's funny because he talks about growth as an individual. He talks a lot about habits, but he talks about growth as an individual, that it's a 1% change. The more I talk to people, the more it just comes up over and over again. It's the small changes, work on that, and then work on the next 1%. I think that's a great takeaway for sure. So we've talked a little bit about diets and fad diets and more of the, I've gained weight, now I want to lose. Can you talk us through some of maybe the do's and don'ts around those things?
Yeah. So I think one of the main things, like you're saying, it's these small incremental changes. So nothing happens overnight. So if you gained 30 pounds, it didn't happen since yesterday. And if you just lost 15 pounds, it probably wasn't just like, oh, I was doing my normal and suddenly I have less weight. So again, giving yourself a lot of grace on how does correcting any bad habit take? Like, how long does that take? It's going to be slow and steady. And then I think, especially as we're home and maybe having less social interaction and less of our normal habits, it's easy to start being extra critical of our own self. And I would say, again, going back to just being mindful and thinking, is it fine if my eating habits don't look the way I want them to right at this minute? Yes. Is there something small I can do? Yes. But in a really practical sense, I think taking the emphasis off of weight is a really important reminder for Americans. We are very weight obsessed. So research actually shows that an unfit normative weight person has a twice as high of a death expectancy than an overweight person who is fit. So what we need to do is maybe take some of the emphasis off of your weight, which is a number on the scale, and very hard to kind of stratify across all these different demographics of male, female, height, bone density, all these different things, to fitness, and thinking, how am I personally trying to become more fit? Both as I think about my diet being nutritionally adequate and my activity being that I can tolerate activities of daily living with a little extra room for, I could jog to the corner if I wanted, or some of these other things. And so certainly weight is an indicator. Like if you've just recently gained a lot of weight, there's definitely something you want to look at, what's causing this underlying habit change. But the concern isn't so much the number on the scale going up. The concern is, what are the habits that are underlying this choice? Is it that I'm really overeating? Is it that I've not been exercising at all? Is it that I'm choosing these really easy to consume food engineered products that I just pick up at the corner store? Or is it an underlying medical condition, like maybe I have hypothyroid and it hasn't been diagnosed? So certainly looking at weight as an indicator of what's happening kind of below the surface, but taking weight off of the main idol of what goal am I reaching for? Because fad diets often are promising, shed 15 pounds in 2 weeks, lose 30% of your body, whatever it is. They make these wild claims, but they require you to take the focus off of what's nutritious and healthful and balanced and sustainable to how am I achieving this one kind of very hard to grasp thing of losing weight at maybe the expense of health, I would say. So certainly circling back to healthy habits are essential. And so if you're noticing, hey, my habits are getting out of control, you can put parameters in place at the outset to help you achieve this new habit. But it shouldn't be something that is, I just follow the rules and that's the way I'm going to go forward. It's like, I want to establish a healthy way of eating. And so if I've been choosing ice cream as my before bed snack every night, I'm going to switch to, I'll have plain yogurt. Like that's in the vein. It's dairy, it's cold, but it's full of protein, it's low in sugar, so this is a better trade-off. And when I can do that and start to really enjoy that, then maybe there's another habit I'm going to take on. Maybe I don't even think I need that snack anymore when it's not the sweet, kind of craving, satisfying thing. Maybe I'm actually not that hungry. And that's something I talk to my kids a lot about. They'll say, I'm hungry. And I'll say, I have out carrots and hummus. You can have them. They're like, I guess I'm not hungry, because they don't really want a snack. They wanted, crackers or something more pleasurable in the moment. It wasn't really motivated by hunger. So I think even just asking those questions of why am I eating, and is it fine to eat out of an emotional place sometimes? Totally. Should that be our habit? No, we should definitely be focusing on nutrition as our habit.
For sure. Would you consider, maybe reaching out to a friend or something like that to be an accountability partner when it comes to food?
Totally. I think that's a really healthy way of helping someone come alongside you as you're thinking about wanting to make healthy choices. I think that accountability piece is really important when we look at really any behavior we want to change. I think we put a lot of emphasis on our own ability to do what we think is best. But as soon as we get another person alongside us, we definitely have better success rates. So finding ways, if you are finding that I'm emotionally eating, definitely talking to someone you trust about that, who would be willing to ask you how that's going. And if it's someone who lives in your home, all the easier, because they would see kind of those habits being played out. Looking for other healthy coping mechanisms, like finding a physical activity you like to do, or even popping a piece of gum in your mouth if you're just wanting kind of that feeling of chewing, having a tall glass of ice water to give yourself an oral satisfaction, but it isn't giving you calories. I think even things that are not food related, like having some time for rest or meditation or prayer, those are really good for kind of redirecting your habits. Or another activity you like, whether it's looking through a magazine or working on a puzzle or a crossword, just something that would be, I'm looking for an activity and I'm defaulting to eating because it's so easy. What can I do that is something I enjoy that takes minimal effort, but would help realign my actions with my goals.
For sure. You just mentioned water. We haven't really talked about that. I'm kind of curious. I mean, it seems like there's a large stress on getting enough water, and the average American is dehydrated. And can you talk to us just a little bit about water?
Yeah, I do think we can use more water in the US. We could drink more water, and tap water it's free, it's accessible, it's clean, and it is extremely hydrating. So I think you can physically drink too much water, but you wouldn't do it out of just natural thirst. So certainly adding in a glass of water whenever you can, I think is a good place to start. And then if you're looking for healthy habits, I would say if you can pick one time of the day to switch a non-water beverage for water, that's beneficial. So if you usually have, an iced tea with your lunch, if you can switch that to an ice water, that's already a great step in the right direction. I guess if it's black tea, that's fine. I mean, an unsweetened tea, there is health benefits to drinking black coffee, black tea, or green teas. I shouldn't say black tea. Unsweetened teas and water. I would say those non-caloric drinks that don't have artificial sweeteners, they don't have additives, those are great. You can drink sparkling water if you're bored by regular water, but you really can't go wrong by having enough water. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. I feel like I've heard of, do this equation with your body weight and figure out how much water to drink. Is there like a general recommendation that you have? Yeah, maybe it does include your weight. I don't know.
Yeah. So certainly in a clinical setting, there are calculations that would tell you exactly how much water you need. But I would say for the general public, the test I would like most people to use is how clear is your urine. So when you're going to the bathroom, if your urine is very pale or close to clear, you are well hydrated. If it is golden to dark yellow, you are dehydrated. And that is just a basic indicator that you should be able to take at any point of the day without doing any math calculations of, have I had enough water? You can usually have at least that one quick, it's not fail proof, but it's definitely a good jumping off point. So drinking water when you're thirsty, drinking water even before you're thirsty, and then checking how clear is your urine.
Perfect. That's great information. My mom will be happy to hear that you're telling everybody to drink more water, because she's been harping on me for that my whole entire life. My
kids always say, I'm dehydrated, they say, because I'm always saying like, well, we don't want to be dehydrated. Have a glass of water.
That's great. And I'm also glad that you included black coffee on the drink list, because as a coffeeholic, self-diagnosed, of course, you just can't get by without it. So
I agree. I also really enjoy a good cup of coffee. And I would say that's an easy place for people to even find room for improvement, because if you're taking your coffee with heavy cream, 3 sugars, a little douse of vanilla syrup or whatever, that is a treat and you're welcome to have it. But would you eat chocolate cake for breakfast every day? Probably you would say, no, that isn't probably consistent with my nutrition goals. So if you're having one of those kind of treat drinks every day, that's a real easy place to start cutting back and finding a rhythm that is, I enjoy things that aren't kind of playing to my brain's short circuit of sugar, salt, and fat. So having black coffee is a great beverage. If you can't get there for the next 5 years, that's fine, but maybe start working towards black coffee, plain tea, unsweetened yogurt, just like bringing yourself back to what would be the basic form of this food, and can I enjoy it in that way? So our family does eat a lot of yogurt. It's plain, unsweetened, whole fat yogurt. And then we'll add in a little bit of honey or a little dollop of fruit preserves or something to give it an extra flavor profile, but at least then you're in control of how sweet is this? And do I actually like the tart flavor of yogurt, or am I trying to have ice cream right now? Just really trying to bring yourself towards what is my ultimate goal. It would be to enjoy the basic form of food. So not needing all of this kind of processing on top to mask the flavors of what does this food really taste like.
Yeah. No, that's great. So we're coming to the end of our time. I've got one additional question that I want to ask you, but I want to also give people the opportunity, if they wanted to get in touch with you or ask you questions or anything like that, how would they go about finding you?
Right now, I don't have a professional website or anything of that nature. I work for a doctor's private practice here in Chicago, so that's pretty limited access, but I certainly would welcome people reaching out to me directly through my Gmail account, which is amandascaletta@gmail.com. So they'd be welcome to reach out if they had a specific question, and I'd love to kind of dialogue with them.
For sure. So my last question is, seems like eating organic food has become more and more of a conversation. Is it worth the extra cost, or are we just wasting money?
Yeah. Oh, you just lobbed me my favorite question, Andrew. This is so good.
Hit a home run.
So it is extremely popular to eat organic food. Nutritionally speaking, if I'm just speaking from a nutritionist point of view, there is such a marginal difference in the nutritional content of an organically grown fruit or vegetable or grain to a conventionally grown fruit or vegetable or grain. And the difference does not warrant its choice over conventionally grown foods. And especially because often this is at the detriment of people who don't feel like they can afford organic produce, often then just bypass all produce because they're afraid that conventionally grown produce is either a waste of their time or toxic to them or full of poisonous chemicals, or insert any kind of fear about eating conventionally grown food. So I would say that's actually a damaging thing that's come out of the organic produce movement, is that conventionally grown foods are often kind of demonized. And nutritionally speaking, that is unfair because they are nutritionally adequate. You will meet your needs by eating conventionally grown foods. Of course, you should wash your fruits and vegetables to remove residual pesticides and those kind of things. Both for organic foods, which use natural pesticides, and conventionally grown foods, which use synthetic pesticides. If you choose to use your buying power to buy organic fruits and vegetables, I think that's a wonderful personal choice. What's more important to me even than organic would be looking at sustainability, because in our modern kind of labeling era, organic is often a marketing ploy to get people to think it is more nutritious and better. But there are industrial farms growing organic produce, meaning they're not using synthetic pesticides, that are not really sustainably considering their impact on the environment. They are trying to produce a food product that people will spend more for. They're not as much concerned about what's the sustainable environmental impact. So if you care about environmental impact and those kind of things, I would say spending more of your money on what is sustainably produced, which can be some industrial and conventional farms do that. Some small organic farms consider those things, but it certainly takes more work, but looking behind what does the label say to how does this align with my personal goals and values. So for some people, that means buying exclusively local produce, kind of know your farmer, whether they're organic or not. I think that's always a great move, but also realizing that the food industry as a whole needs to be held accountable to certain standards, and that standard shouldn't be organic. It should be environmental sustainability and making sure that we're not over farming land, we're not just stamping something with a label in order to get a consumer to spend more, and even just being very careful about reading labels. When something says free range eggs, that might mean they're not in a tiny little cage, but they might still be inside in a very crowded environment. They can just move around freely. Is that what you're picturing when you hear free range? Maybe not. Maybe you're picturing, pasture free, but then also remembering that chickens often like to be indoors. And so maybe they have access to outside, but they don't really take advantage of that. So just reading behind, what does this label actually mean, and not taking it at face value, because there's a lot of marketing that is going into the labeling to make you use your money to purchase something maybe for reasons that even are inconsistent with what you think you're purchasing for. So if you like organic food, and in some instances, I would say just as a personal reflection, I shop at a big box chain. I won't put their name in there now, but many of the things are exclusive. You don't have a choice. It's only organic now because purchasing power has made an impact on what do people stock. Do I think that's the right decision? Not necessarily, but it is the byproduct of people using their money to buy organic. And I would say if we can focus more on sustainability, that is a more important piece to me. And nutritionally speaking, consider organic and conventionally grown to be equals. So don't buy organic for the sake of the label would be my takeaway.
Great. I appreciate that. Well, this has been a great conversation, Amanda. I appreciate you taking the time. And I feel like we've just sort of scratched the surface of what's really a wealth of knowledge as far as it goes with nutrition. Can you leave us with some final thoughts or action things that we can be doing to really focus on our nutrition?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to be with you, and certainly I'd love to come back and talk more about any one topic should your listeners desire it. My main takeaway, I would say, is know what is working against you when you're coming up with your nutrition goals. So whether it's rushing or convenience or lack of margin or inability to sit down or distracted eating, or if it's falling kind of prey to the marketing scams that are on boxes and packaged foods, or if you're just looking for a quick fix, like I heard this diet's great, I'm going to buy this book and I'm going to follow this. All of those things really are working against the goal of healthy eating, which would be to provide you and your family, if you prepare food for more than yourself, with a variety of colorful fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, beans, and seeds, dairy, and meat and fish in varieties that are interesting to you. You should enjoy your food. If you are interested in checking out another person's culture to taste new flavors, that's a great way to try something new. But mainly, you can't really go wrong with focusing on the basics. What 200 years ago would people have been eating will probably be what in 200 years we'll be eating. Maybe it will be grown different or produced differently, but I think really bringing it back to the basics is an essential tenet for eating well. In the US, the Western diet has not had a positive impact on any of the cultures that it's being adopted by. And so just being aware of what are those pitfalls in the American way of eating, and how can you kind of circumvent them with good habits, smart choices, and just really a balanced approach. So finding creative ways to engage with what are your nutrition goals and how can you align more closely with them over time.
Great. Well, again, I appreciate the time, Amanda. This has been a great conversation, and I'm sure we'll have you on again in the future.
That'd be great. Thanks so much, Andrew.
Thanks.
Thank you for investing in yourself. Remember to connect with us on Facebook by searching The Stewardship Podcast, or email us at thestewardshippodcast@gmail.com. Do you have an interest in connecting with Andrew? Find him on LinkedIn or Facebook, and make sure to join us for the next episode.